Unreal Engine 5.7 is out, and with it comes an awesome new feature that's called PCG Mode, or I guess it is just PCG Selection Mode. And I'm talking about over here under Selection Mode, you now have a PCG section. Now to get this, of course, as always, you have to go to Edit Plugins, search PCG, and turn on the Procedural Content Generation Framework PCG, but this time it is no longer in beta. It is version 1.0, so go ahead and enable it and restart your engine. And then you'll have access to this. I've been playing around with this for a little bit, and I want to show you guys what I've learned, some tricks, some tips, how it works, how do you use it. I'm going to go over the general thing of it all, and then in a future video, we'll kind of go more in depth on how to really utilize some nifty things with it that you possibly couldn't do before, as well as some extra little tools you could use in combination with it to make it even more powerful. Let's get into it. If I go ahead and change the selection mode to PCG, we get this menu here. We have spline, paint, and volume. We'll go one at a time here. For now, let's go ahead and just select draw spline. Over here, you will see 3 default built-in tools, and they're quite nice. You have a spacing tool, a linear grammar tool, a spline mesh tool, all built in. So you can just click on these and it will change the settings here to whatever you need. And for example, the grammar tool, you just open it up and change the grammar, change the modules, the spawning, etc. The spacing tool, you can tell it to spawn static meshes. So for example, I could tell it that I'm going to be spawning cubes, but then you just draw. So if I go ahead and fly on down, I can just click and drag and you'll see it'll dynamically draw everything. So there's our spline. It has drawn it, but just because I've let go, I haven't clicked accept, which means we can change all this still dynamically. I can add another mesh here. So put a sphere. I can make it so cubes are 3 times more often to appear. And you can see it has kept the spline. We're just editing it before finalizing it. You can spawn actors. You can do randomization, etc. And you can even attach it to a specific actor. In this case, the default here is actor. But if you want to, you can attach it to something else. For example, if you have a blueprint that is using the spline for something else, maybe a character is going to be walking along it, but it's also spawning things with PCG in that same location, you can have all that functionality kind of put together onto that blueprint. So you don't have to have an empty actor with your PCG graph. But the main thing here is you don't have to make a blueprint anymore. If you're just making a blueprint just to put a spline, no longer have to do that. This will create it for you and you can tweak the values, because the values you see here are all exposed values from the graph. If I go ahead and open it, you can see this is the graph, and here in the bottom left corner you see graph parameters. Now this has been updated as well because there's now grouping and everything, which is amazing. And by the way, the grouping is done by hitting this little caret here, and then here you could change the category. Now it is all done through just strings. Basically you have to type everything in, but you can change the clamping, the minimums, maximums, the unit types. You could put it all here. It just has to be typed in. Unfortunately, it is not just a drop down, which is what I would have liked, but you're able to organize it, and all of these categories from this graph will then appear here for you to customize. For example, we can change the sampling here, right? We have a count of 10. I can change to a count of 20. I can use distance instead. And you can see we can just go ahead and start tweaking this dynamically. We can randomize some values, randomize the minimum position, let's say by negative 100, 100 to positive 100, right? And we have just made this spline, and if we're not happy, I just click and drag again, and this new one will be the new drawing. Every time I click and drag, it will overwrite it. And by the way, I'm currently using free draw, which is the default mode. You can enable closed spline. It can also do tangent drag, for example, so you can click and drag, whatever you prefer. The default though is just free draw, which is what I prefer. And if you're wondering how do we tell where it projects onto, that is under Raycast Rules. So here by default, it is enabled for landscapes, meshes, and it is ignoring PCG. If you don't want it to ignore PCG, you just uncheck this and it will project onto PCG as well. Or if you want to add your own, you hit this add element button, and then here you could just say only certain classes are allowed, or you want to constrain to an actor. You could specify the specific actor in your level that you want to constrain it to, and you can turn it on and off and customize this. This is kind of for all of these tools, and it's really powerful because you can basically just now draw PCG onto other meshes really easily using this, which is awesome. But once you're happy with whatever you set up, you can hit accept, and you'll see here in the outliner I have the tool. When you create the PCG graph, you can specify the name you will get in the end, and it's been attached to a type actor. If I go ahead and click away and then click back on it, so it'll refresh, you can see there's our spline component, there's our PCG tool component, and there's the stuff that has spawned. So everything is here with all of the settings under PCG parameter overrides set to the values that we've specified. And if we're not happy with it still selected selected, I can go back to draw spline and draw again, and it will overwrite the spline. So even if I'm done with this and say this is the new spline here, if I'm not happy, and go back, draw again, and draw a new one. Now this does mean that it is overwriting it every time. It is not adding to it. But if you know me, I like to have more. So there's a way to get around that, because of course there is, and I will show you. If you're happy with the spline, let's say, all you need to do is go into your actor here, select the spline component, Control D to duplicate it. It will not let you name it spline component 1. It says this name is reserved for engine use. So you can call it whatever else, let's say original spline. And then I still have the one here, which means when I do draw spline, I can draw a new one, and that will overwrite the spline component, but it has kept the one that I had previously. This original spline is this guy, and this is the new one. So we can now draw this one. Now you want to be wondering, okay, well, how do we now change this one if we so wish? Well, we can still do that actually, just not through PCG mode. PCG mode will only override the original. If you change your mode here to modeling, you can go to draw spline under create. Output mode will be an existing actor, and because I had it selected, it's already piped in here. Or you just go ahead and select it from the drop down, or click this icon to add the selected one. You can tell it to overwrite an existing spline. The one that is controlled by PCG here is index 0. We want to modify the one we copied, so we need to change the index to 1. It is an array, so it starts at 0. So the one that is always being used by PCG is 0. We are using our duplicate, which is 1. So we set it to 1, and then we can click and drag and draw this out and hit accept. And if I just move it, it will update to that curve. It doesn't do it right away, as you saw. So once again, go to draw spline, make sure the actor is selected. Existing spline is set to our duplicate, which is the copy, so it's index 1. And now I draw whatever pattern I want. I can even make it a loop, then hit accept. It will not see an update, but once I move it, it'll refresh the PCG graph, and there's our update. So you can still modify the lines and redraw them for your copies. So if you want to have one PCG graph that has multiple, you can, and the original draw spline here will still allow you to draw the main one live. So it's a nice little workaround for this feature. You can use one PCG graph to have multiple splines, so that way you don't have to specifically create a new actor for each one if you don't want to. Moving on in the spline category, you do see you have draw spline and draw spline surface. The only difference between draw spline and draw spline surface is the fact that draw spline surface is always a loop. It is a closed loop. So some tools you want to have basically interior sampling, while others can do interior on spline. So this is just a way to basically separate them out so you know, okay, this one's requiring a loop and this one can be a loop. So if under here, just like the other one, I can change the sampling, I can change the filtering, all of the things. The only thing you want to avoid is try to make sure you have everything deselected if you don't want to overwrite them. Otherwise, it will overwrite the values. So with nothing selected, I'll come here and then I'll use this area tool and I will draw out, and you'll see it automatically has this area closed off. If I was to zoom in, you'll see there's a bunch of little crosses here showing the different axes, and we can go ahead and just change under spawning, go ahead and tell it to spawn cubes instead. And there you go. And again, same thing as before, we can go ahead and draw this out and hit accept, and then we'll have this. Then go ahead, deselect it, reselect it, and you'll see all the information. Duplicate the spline component if you wish. So we can now draw a new one here. And now we have two areas under one graph. Nice and simple like that. Now there are multiple categories, as you can see, and I'm going to quickly show you how that is actually even controlled. If I go ahead and open up one of these example graphs, which by the way, you shouldn't modify because they are part of the kind of plugin engine content. So make copies if you want to make variations. But here you'll see that pretty much everything is normal. It is just using get spline data, and it's attaching everything to an actor. So that's all the normal stuff, using surface sampler for checking the area and everything. But with nothing selected in the detail panel, you will see we now have this tool data section. Here is the tool name, area tool, and you can put a tooltip there. Here's the actor that it's going to be attaching to by default. So it is of type actor, but as you saw, it can be overridden. And under compatible tool tags, if we open it, you will see a place here to types at the end. So this is called Spline Surface Tool, and that's why it is available under Spline Surface and not Draw Spline. So if I come here, you'll see I don't have this area version. Area tool is only available under here. Now, it's actually very simple to remember what the tool name is called. You see how it says draw spline, drop the draw, and then whatever it says with no spaces, add the word tool. So spline tool, spline surface tool. So for example, if I wanted to have this as my own and I wanted to add a new version, I would just add a new one here and I'll call this spline tool. And then if I reselect draw spline from scratch, you will see there's our area tool under draw spline. And if I don't want it there, I'll go ahead and delete it, then deselect it, reselect draw spline, and it's gone again. So it's very simple to add tools to these categories. So it'll just be a button click there. So drop the word draw, whatever the name of it is with no spaces, and the word tool. Nice and simple, actually. Drop down would still be better. That's kind of the two spline modes. Let's go over to paint. Now, paint, what I was expecting was it to work like the foliage draw, or if you make your actual brush bigger, it will splatter more in an area. That's not quite how it works. Let me show you. We'll use the default spacing tool here. I'll just go ahead and add a mesh here. Again, we'll select a cube. I'll go into a new area. You'll see I have this brush. Over here, we can change the size of it. So if I made something like 10, right, it'll be a lot bigger. If I click and drag, you'll see I am not getting points across the entire area. I'm getting them just at the center of this full paint tool. And that's kind of the thing. Also, Control Z will deselect this entire thing and reset everything. So be careful with Control Z. I'll go ahead and reselect my cube. If we go back here, you can see the brush mode is sphere, and you have the minimum point spacing. If I change this to 300, we'll change the brush size back up, and I start drawing, you'll see they're now 300 units away from each other. Now, they're 300 units away from the last one. As you can see, I can place them within 300 units of each other just fine, even though I never let go. And if I do let go, then I definitely can place them within 300 units of each other. So this is very different than the actual foliage brush, where it kind of guarantees certain spacing away from other foliage. This is basically the distance from the last one. So because of that, what you could do theoretically is have your distance that you want to place things along. Let's say you want things 500 units away from each other. Under brush advance, you could open this up and then you have a specified radius. If I go ahead and specify a radius of 500, the same distance as the spacing, when I place one, I can say, okay, once it gets to the edge here, it will place another. So now I can say, okay, there's gonna be a new one here, right? And then I'm like, okay, this is the radius. Maybe I want one in this direction. And I can kind of expect where it's gonna place the next one. So I cannot put it here. It'll be too close. And you can see based off of my radius, I can see that it would be much closer to the left one. So maybe I don't want to place it there, maybe around in this direction. So it's not fantastic, but the brush size does have a few different actual use cases. If I go ahead and just draw a lot of squares here, you will see that the original one's just maintained and I can draw more. Unlike the spline, it will continue to adding on top of them. So I can draw more and more and more. And if I'm not happy, I can hold shift and it will turn it into a red circle. And now this is actually using the full size of that brush. So now I can erase things in areas. I go ahead and erase everything, for example, and start over. So the brush does have an effect here, which is great, but it does have another effect actually. If I change the radius here to 200 and go ahead and just draw a few here, the spacing is still the same at 500, but I just drew it at 200 radius. And then I draw it at 2000 radius. Again, spacing is the same, but the brush radius is different. If I open up debug and I enable this top option, display painted points wireframe bounds, go ahead and turn that on, you will see I have very large bounds. And why do I have very large bounds? It's because the ones with a larger brush have a larger bounds. So we can go here and change the radius back down to, let's say, 50, and I can just draw a few here, just like that. And you'll see the bounds are pretty much not visible because they're the size of the cube. If I make them 100, it'll be a little more visible. And you can see the bounds are adjusting. So that means that the brush is affecting the bounds and not the spread. So that means you can actually use it for certain things, like in your actual graph, you could take the bounds of the points and scale your meshes relative to the bounds. So you can have it automatically scale the size of the object, for example. Or there's a few other things you could probably start thinking about possibly doing that utilize the bounds of the shape compared to just the object that it's spawning. I'd also turn on show painted stamps bounding box instead of the original, and you'll see that is the full kind of area where things have been painted. It just makes a big bounding box over everything, so you know this is kind of the area where everything is. This is just in the debug here. While this is called paint mode, it is effectively click mode as well. So you just click where you want things and you can place one ofs. And you've been wondering what the red line there is. That is the forward axis. So that is where the cube is facing. And if I scroll my scroll wheel, you can see it is rotating. So if I place it here, it is now rotated in that direction. So just using my scroll wheel, I can very easily just rotate that point where it is spawning. And how much it actually rotates here is very controllable. Over here, rotate yaw step size. If I made this 45 degrees, when I place and just scroll up a little bit, it will increment it in 45-degree increments. So I can very easily place things and line things up to a grid, for example. So just use scroll wheel to rotate it, but just know that when you're dragging, it is not rotating the scroll wheel. While I'm holding the left click, if I scroll, nothing will happen. All of these will face the same direction. You can, of course, in your actual graph, give it random rotations later, but in terms of the original rotation that you drew, they will all face the same way. But once we're happy, we can just go ahead and hit accept, and there's our points. Now, if I go ahead and deselect and reselect it like before, you'll see there's our PCG component. It's been attached to an actor, and there's our instance static mesh. But here's the interesting thing, right? We painted these. There is no spline. There is no volume. How is it getting the information of where these points are? Well, for this, specifically for the paint tool, if I go ahead and open up the graph, you'll see one, not too much here, but really it's this node, get tool data. This get tool data is what gets the information of the points. Here's the tool tag and the data instance. It's called paint tool and paint layer. We can see here under data instance, it is selected paint layer. If I go ahead and duplicate this and change this to paint layer 2 on the duplicate, and then go back to the same thing, you'll see there's paint layer 2. So what I could do is have something on 1 and something else on 2 at the same time. And that is pretty much how one of the other tools is designed. I'll go ahead and remove it from this version, but that's what this layered place tool is. You'll see here you have layer 0, 1, 2, and you can specify which layer do you want to actually add to. You could even have an exclusion layer. So on layer 0, for example, I can specify I want to spawn cubes, and on layer 1, I want to spawn spheres. So now I'm painting on layer 0, so when I click and drag, I'm getting my cubes. And if I change to layer 1, I will now spawn spheres because they're two separate layers. And the way it works, as I showed, is it's just using different get tool data. So this one just says paint tool layer 0, paint tool layer 1, layer 2, and there's an exclusion layer that is just being used as a way of cutting things out. So this is another way of using that brush size to cut things out. So you can very easily just make it so you can paint different things in different sections by just sectioning it all off and keeping it all within one graph. When you're happy though, you do hit accept. And just like before, if you have this selected still, I can go back to paint and I can go ahead and paint some more, hit accept, and it is just adding onto the same graph. Because as the spline version overwrote the first one, painted doesn't overwrite, it just adds. And so we're continuously building up on it, or if you hit shift, you erase stuff. Would I like some of the features from the actual foliage, like maintaining the distance and things of that nature? Absolutely. But a lot of that can be controlled with the actual graph. Now there's one thing to actually keep in mind with all this, and that is the eraser part of it. On the paint tool specifically, if I go back to paint with this selected, so we just modify the values here, let's go ahead and just give it a random transform. I'll go ahead and give it a random transform of minus 500 to 500 X and Y. So these cubes have all moved, and we'll do the same thing for the spheres. We'll do a random transform minus 500 to 500. It does not re-project based on the new locations, unless of course you tell it to, depending on your order of operations in the graph. It's not an automatic thing. This is all your own parameters exposed. So we have done this, and now let's say I want to erase this sphere here. Well, if I hold shift, right, I'm in erase mode, and I click and drag, I'm not erasing. Why am I not erasing it? Well, I need to erase the original spot. Where was the original spot? I don't remember, and I cannot find it. The only way I could possibly find it is if I show the brush points here with this option here under debug, show brush wireframe bounds. But again, that bounds is related to the size of the brush. So now I can see, okay, this is probably this one. The one for here, well, maybe it's not. I'm not sure. Maybe this is the one for this one, right? You cannot tell that this is specifically this one, but if I erase here, you can see it disappears. So that was that one. And you cannot undo. If I try to undo, gone ahead and undid the entire active tool. So be careful. It might be good for the paintbrush specifically to design it where if you paint it in certain areas, that's where they will stay, or be okay that you would need to disable the actual movement and then erase and then redraw it. It's a little fiddly. I personally don't like this implementation. I would love for it to erase erase where the new position is compared to where the old position is, but I understand why it is the way it is. But I wanted to let you guys know that this is the case, so you're not caught off guard when you randomize your points and you're wondering why you cannot erase something in the paint mode. And by the way, if you want to put something into this paint section, of course, it'll be paint tool with nothing selected under tool data, paint tool. Like I said, what it is, tool. The final one is the volume. Volume, as you might imagine, creates a volume. I'll make sure nothing is selected, and then I'll click and drag, and you'll see I get, well, a volume, and then I can raise it up. And this volume is just placing things when it overlaps with the ground. Now, one thing you might notice is I drew from the floor and I made it go up. I cannot put this into the ground. And fun fact, I'm pressing QWER for movement tools. You can even see here, they're all grayed out. So if I want to draw this and have it be in the ground, I can't. The only way you could move it right now before hitting accept is by going to the outliner and then moving it down here. And now when I move it down, you can see, okay, now it's actually overlapping the ground where I want it to. But if you just click and drag, it will put it at the ground level. And then when you drag up, it will continue to move it up. And you'll see it is trying really hard to keep it kind of where you drew. If you go ahead and hit accept, you'll get this actual volume. And like the others, if you hit the volume one more time, you will override the volume area. So you'll have to remove it and redraw it. Let's go ahead and actually put in some cubes so we can see this better. There we go. Now, another difference here is you don't have an option to attach it to an actor here like the others. And in the outliner, you can see it is a PCG volume. If I go ahead and accept, this is the same kind of volume that you get when you just drag it out by yourself. So if I was to navigate to this tool and just drag this out like you would previously, that's the same thing. This is also a PCG volume. And if you're wondering how do you have it attached to actual blueprint, so maybe you can have some kind of functionality in the event graph, in the constructor script, or whatever it is, but still maintain that PCG, well, there is a way of doing it, but you have to make a custom type of a blueprint, which is basically a volume. If I go ahead and right click, I can go to blueprint class, and under all classes, I can search for volume. And you'll see under actor, brush, volume, you cannot select this, but you can select location volume. If I go ahead and create this, I can call it BP location volume. I can open it up, and you'll see all it has is a brush component here, but it has the construction script and event graph like a normal blueprint. It effectively is a normal blueprint that is just a child of that actor. And if you want to actually use that inside of your volume PCG graph, you have to specify it here. Instead of actor, use the BP location volume. Again, do not recommend modifying the originals, make copies. But if you do this, then with nothing selected, if I go back to volume and I draw out a new one here, let's give it some cubes, let's drop it down, and then I hit accept, you will see here, there's the PCG scatter tool actor, and there's our blueprint type. And that of course opens up the full version. But unfortunately, you cannot just plug in the blueprint that you want to use here. You have to do it on the actual graph, which is slightly different. Unfortunately, you cannot have multiple volumes like you could have multiple splines per PCG graph. If you were to make your own setup, you could just use a regular blueprint and have a just box volume and use that. Then you will be able to have multiple box volumes all within one graph. But then you won't have this draw out feature. You'll just do it the old school way of just making the volume and placing it where you need. And you can add more and more box collision components if you want more and more areas. So a slight limitation with this, what can you do? But that is pretty much the modes here. We have 3 modes. Spline has 2 options, paint has 1, and volume has 1. It is possible we'll get more modes in the future, but really this does kind of cover all scenarios. Splines, just regular points, and volumes. That's pretty much all of PCG. So now it's up to us to create the tools to make use of this. I'm just happy that when next time I use a spline PCG graph, I will not have to make a spline blueprint to go along with it. It'll automatically be created for me. And that is fantastic. Hopefully what I've shown you here has helped you out understanding a few of the intricacies of the setup, as well as a few things you possibly didn't know. Now I want to give a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for all the support. It really means a lot. And if you'd like to join the community, the link to which is in the description below as always. And if you're looking to grow your PCG knowledge, check out this one right over here to continue your PCG learning journey.